Okay, Chapter 1, Part 2, New World Beginnings. Now, when we talk about the Spanish colonization in the New World, we have to talk about the Spanish conquistadors, these conquerors coming from Europe, making colonization obviously possible. Now, this is a special group of people simply because they have to be willing to give up everything back in Europe to come and try to make a name for themselves. Now, the reason that this is going to be possible is in 1494, a Treaty of Tordesillas was created in conjunction with Spain, Portugal, and Vatican City, obviously the head of the Catholic Church, basically claiming all of North and South America for the Spanish, and some of it was also reserved to the Portuguese. So from the European perspective, this was property owned by the Spanish and the Portuguese. Obviously, the English and the French are going to have something to say about that later, but we'll get to that. Now, for the Spanish, and this is very, very important simply because we will see a difference between their motivation and their idea of colonization and how that differs with the English and the French later on. But from their perspective, it was all about God, gold, and glory. And this is historians' take on this colonization. Now, from God's perspective, these are very devout Catholics. They felt that God had endowed them with the right to take over this land, but more than that, it was their duty to Christianize these Native Americans that they encountered, these godless heathens in their eyes. So God was very, very important for the Spanish conquistadors because he played a role in not only the reason why they were going, but also their desire and their goals for once they got there. Gold, obviously, they wanted to make it rich. The amount of money being pumped out of the New World in precious metals, both in gold and silver, is astronomical. In fact, we saw in the 100 years following 1492, during that Columbian encounter, a 500% increase in consumer costs, basically because all of this money was being pumped into Europe out of Latin America and South America. This is really the root of the modern banking system, this gold and silver that was coming out of the area. And finally, glory. Glory is very important to the Spanish conquistadors, especially if they are second sons, meaning they're not the firstborn. They're not going to inherit from their parents when they pass away. They have to make a name for themselves. And what better way to make a name for themselves than to give up everything back in Europe, get on a ship, and try to strike it rich in the New World. So God, gold, and glory is really, from a historian's perspective, why the Spanish came here in the first place. Now, the way that this is going to be possible is through the encomienda system. The Spanish government set up this system to give land grants. The encomienda system, these are land grants that the Spanish government gave to Spanish citizens, to these conquistadors. Basically, they would say, here is a tract of land for you that you now own in the New World. Either you were a friend of the king and queen, or you had done something really well that got them on their radar, but you were given this land grant. And not only did you own the land and all of the precious metals on it and all of the agriculture and everything else that came out of that land, but you also owned the Native Americans who lived there as well. This is the first real rudimentary form of slavery in the New World, using these Native Americans to constantly bring tribute or constantly bring stuff to the conquistador on a monthly basis. They were required. They had quotas they had to meet. Now, from the Spanish perspective, they were giving them a really good deal. Even though they were an enslaved people, they were also going to be Christianized. This is a very strategic way to Christianize the people of the New World, which is why when you look at Latin and South America today, there is a very strong Catholic population there now. Now, we can't talk about the Spanish conquest of the New World without looking at Mexico. In 1519, Hernando Cortez, who was based in Cuba by this time, obviously Columbus had already arrived. They'd already established bases in the Bahamas and in Cuba. Cortez had heard rumors about this great Native American tribe in Mexico, what we now call Mexico City. These are the Aztecs. Great wealth, amazing city, massive amounts of wealth for theirs for the taking. So Hernando Cortez left in 1519, bringing with him 2 interpreters that would allow him to speak with the Aztecs once he arrived. Now, along the way, obviously Mexico City is in the middle of Mexico. So On foot en route to Mexico City, they encountered a lot of local unrest among the tribes surrounding the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs, who had set themselves up as this great government above everyone else, had required all of these local tribes, once again on a monthly basis, to bring tribute to them every single month. Basically a quota of stuff they had to provide, or they were in some serious trouble, death or destruction of their village. So as a result of this very unforgiving tribute system, these local tribes weren't exactly fans of the Aztec society. And also in Cortez's favor is that he was thought to be the returning god Quetzalcoatl by the Aztecs. Now, in Aztec religion, they believed that their society was created by this fair-skinned, light-haired god named Quetzalcoatl however many years ago. He was said to have created the Aztec society and then had left across the ocean and had promised to one day return to take his place as the head of Aztec society. So here comes these huge ships filled with white-skinned men, amazing animals that they've never seen before, and he was thought to be this Quetzalcoatl returning. So when he entered the city of Tenochtitlan, which is today Mexico City, he was thought to be this god, and he was welcomed with open arms for the time being. Now, what Cortez encountered when he reached Tenochtitlan was an island metropolis that would have rivaled any of the great cities of Europe at the time. 300,000 people were estimated to live in this city. Now, Mexico City obviously today is not an island. Since then, the lake has been drained, but at this time it was an island with causeways going into the center, which made it very easy for the Aztecs to defend themselves. And for the time, they were welcomed as guests of the king or the Emperor Montezuma. The problem is that as time went on, the Aztec people started to realize that Montezuma had been taken prisoner by Cortez, and that these were not the returning gods that they had thought, because all these men cared about was gold and women and drinking. So this couldn't have been the returning god Quetzalcoatl. So on June 30th, 1520, also known as Noche Triste by the Spanish, this is sad night, the Aztecs drove the Spanish out of the city. Now, it was only a couple hundred Spanish men compared to 300,000 Aztecs. It was no question. So they were driven out of the city by the Aztecs. The problem is, though, that Cortez wasn't going to let this city go once he saw the wealth and capabilities that they had. So he turned around, using aid from these local tribes who were not exactly happy with the Aztecs' power that they had around them, turned around and overthrew the Aztec Empire in August of 1521. So we see a very rapid fall of the Aztec Empire. This was the greatest Native American civilization at this time. And a small group of Spanish were able to bring it down. Now, obviously, they had the power of those other local tribes. It wasn't just a couple hundred men. They obviously had the power of the men from the local village. But not only that, what Cortez had on his side the most was an epidemic of smallpox was raging through the village. Smallpox, like we've seen with the other Native Americans at this time, absolutely decimated the Aztec people. 90% death rate. Now, it's very difficult to defend your city, to defend your civilization, when 90% of the people were dying from smallpox. Not only that, but here are these white Spanish who are unaffected by the smallpox. So from the Spanish perspective, this was God on their side. That God had put this horrible disease on the Aztec people to allow them to take control of this city. And very, very quickly we see the fall of the Aztec Empire, only to be replaced by a Spanish system very, very similar. The Spanish people did not do away with that tribute system that they had put onto place on the local tribes. They instead replaced themselves at the top and required these local tribes to continue bringing tribute to them. So it didn't really change anything, just who was in charge. Now, from a historian's perspective, what we see on the part of the Spanish, they really instituted a two-part system, assimilation and syncretism. Now, with assimilation first, This is a melding. This is a morphing together of culture. It is taking the Spanish culture and fusing it with the local culture that the people had. So we're really creating a new type of culture. You're not required to give everything up that you had before. It is being merged together. And with this merging, we see a new type of people, the mestizos, a mixed race people, because the Spanish intermarried with the Native Americans, thus creating what we think of today as Latin Americans and South Americans, because they assimilated, a melding of the culture. Now, very, very similar to this is the idea of syncretism. This is a melding or morphing together of the religions. So it's not asking the Aztecs or whatever the local tribe is to 100% give up their religion. Instead, it's fusing on top of that Christianity. So, okay, Aztecs, you once believed in the god Quetzalcoatl. You were wrong. That wasn't Quetzalcoatl. That was Jesus. You have this shrine here to a goddess. Now it becomes a shrine to the Virgin Mary. So it's in placing Christianity on top of the old religion. It makes it a lot easier, I should say, to accept this new religion because it's kind of a morphing together. Now, this has been done multiple times over the history of the world. Christmas Day is an example of syncretism. Christmas isn't the actual day that Jesus was born. This was a pagan holiday that the Christians imposed on the pagans, thus creating Christmas Day. This is an artist, obviously we don't know what it looks like because this is since gone, but this is an artist's depiction of what Tenochtitlan had looked like with all of the causeways going into the city. Since then, this lake has been drained. This is showing all of the expeditions both from Europe to the Americas and to Asia as well. And then once in the Americas, the conquistadors and their conquest into North and South America. Now finally, what does Spanish America look like? What does the colony that Spain creates look like? Now first off, like I said, the Spanish really didn't change anything. They just replaced the governing body, whether that be the Aztecs in Mexico City or the Incans, who we're not going to talk about, over in Peru, and really forced the local people to continue mining gold, mining silver, and bringing it to them as tribute. They had this quota system. And really this is a subjugation. Even though they did follow assimilation and syncretism, it was all focused on controlling the local population for their betterment. Now, we always talk about the founding of Jamestown as the first colony in what is now the United States. That's not actually true. That was the first English colony. The first actual settlement in what is today modern day the United States was St. Augustine, a Spanish colony in 1565. Now, this idea, this conversion to Christianity, this God part of the deal, obviously this is a big part, but it wasn't always just accepted. Pope's Rebellion, or the Pueblo Revolt, is an example of this, where the Native Americans did not accept it in New Mexico. What we see is a group of Native Americans, the Pueblo, rising up against this imposed Christianity on them, destroying churches, killing priests, killing settlers, to try to re-establish their religion. They were not successful. The Spanish eventually did come back in and take over, but it shows that it wasn't always about what the Spanish wanted, and they weren't always just accepted. There were examples of rebellion, and that is chapter 1.